All right, welcome. This kind of came out of nowhere, but I think it gets its own little video because it needs a little explanation. Kings get their goaltender in Darcy Kuemper. Capitals get the centerman Pierre-Luc Dubois. I got my Darcy Kuemper jersey on. I love this jersey. It's the Kachina. It is also a fake. It's one of the original jerseys I bought, so don't come at me with the hate because it's a fake jersey. I still love it. I also got my Locos hat on because what is this? Let's talk about it. So Kings get Darcy Kuemper. He signed for 3 more years at $5.25 million. It's a little pricey for a goaltender, especially one who's underperformed in his last position, lost the starting job in Washington to Charlie Lindgren. Lindgren was good, very good. Took that job from Kuemper. Needless to say, there's 3 more years. The Kings needed a goaltender. They have Riddick, who is a very good backup. But is he a starter in the NHL? Probably not. On the open market, there's not a whole lot of goaltenders, at least in free agency. You're probably going to have to get a goaltender by way of trade, and those options are somewhat limited. For the Kings, dumping off Pierre-Luc Dubois and his contract to get a goaltender is probably the cheapest way to go about that. Now, I like Darcy Kuemper a lot. We'll talk about that. But the Capitals get Dubois. Okay, centerman. He's probably not going to play first-line minutes in Washington. Strome's got that pretty secured up. Strome, Ovi, they have that chemistry. He's probably going to slot in on that second line. Capitals don't have a second-line center. They also only had about $7 million in cap space with roster spots to fill. You're probably not going to get a second-line center in unrestricted free agency on the open market for a cap hit of say $5 million or so. Excuse me. Needless to say, Dubois signed for 7 more years at $8.5 million. It's a lot. Both of these teams had players with contracts they were looking to dump. Turned out to be an even swap in terms of the players, and the Capitals assume a little more of a cap hit for a longer time. Dubois also has a full no movement clause, means you can't put him on waivers, you can't send him down to the AHL. You can't trade him without his permission for the next 4 years. In year 5, it's a 15 no trade list for Dubois, and in years 6 and 7, it's a 10-team no trade list. Capitals are stuck with Dubois for the next 4 years, assuming he does not approve any trade or kind of handcuffs the Capitals and is like, hey, I want to go to Montreal, don't care, this needs to happen. Right? He kind of has a little bit of that power and a little bit of that control. Of course, the Capitals don't have to trade him, but that makes kind of a hairy situation. Your players underperforming, kind of sitting out. You have this cap hit for this player. It gets hairy, right? So Dubois does have some power here. But going back to the cap, Kings get an extra $3.52 million in cap space, whereas the Capitals lose $2.5 million or $3.25 million in cap space, bringing the total cap space of the Kings to $23.45 million. They still have unrestricted free agents like Victor Arvidsson, RV if you will, and Waugh on the back end, whereas the Capitals, $3.735 million in cap space. They don't have any big signings they need to do, right? You got Pacioretty, Abe Kubel, Matthew Phillips, and Lucas Johansson all without contracts entering this upcoming year. I kind of expect them to sign Johansson. Maybe Kubel, we'll see. But for the most part, this is kind of where it starts to be an issue for the Capitals. They don't have a lot of cap space. They're going to run it back with a similar team. Maybe you get a bit of an upgrade in your second-line center position. But to a point where their goal differential was so crazy that I don't know if they're a playoff team if you run it back with the same roster plus Dubois. I don't know. This might be a transition year for the Capitals. They have they have TJ Oshie coming off the books, or at least you can re-sign him at a lower cap hit. His cap hit comes off the books after this upcoming year, and they'll have some good cap space. They'll be able to make some moves next offseason, but this is not an offseason where they can make a whole lot of moves. I think if you trade Kuemper out, maybe maybe you bundle something with him, right? Maybe you bundle like a sixth round pick with him, or you kind of pay to get that moved out. Then you're talking about $10 million in cap space ish. Just kidding, 10, like $12 million in cap space. You can do a little more on the free agent market and still have that money for next year. But yeah, it's not necessarily how that's going to pan out. So let's talk about it a little more in depth. The Kings needed a goaltender. There's no surprise there. You go out, you get Linus Ullmark, who I believe the reports are he rejected a trade to LA this past season. Linus Ullmark still with that no trade clause, probably not going to the Kings. Markstrom, hours earlier, got dealt to New Jersey, right, for a first round pick and a decent defenseman. The goaltenders left for on the trade market aren't, I don't know, like the quality dips a bit, right? You have Philip Gustafson up in Minnesota, who could be on the move, might not be, but is he a number one? Well, he didn't take the job over in Minnesota last year, right? Whereas Kuemper in the past has proven he can be a number one. He's a very solid goaltender. It's really dependent on how the defense plays in front of him. If the defense is keeping the shots to the outside, Kuemper is fantastic. Whereas if there's a lot of odd man rushes and high danger scoring chances, Kuemper tends to not do so well, comparatively speaking, to the league average in terms of those shots against. So it really depends on the defense of what the defensive style of the team he's on is playing in front of him. He did very well in Arizona. Again, Arizona Coyotes jersey, but Arizona, for years, keeps their shots mostly to the outside. They play in tight towards the goaltender, and they don't give up too many high danger scoring chances. And they played really well in front of they played that style very well in front of Darcy Kuemper when he was in Arizona. Colorado, not so much. Colorado plays defense by playing offense. They hold on to the puck a lot in the offensive zone, but it also leaves kind of your back end a little exposed for odd man rushes and stuff. So Kuemper, when it comes to that stuff, is good, but I wouldn't say he's great or elite. So that's kind of your downfall when it comes to Darcy Kuemper, and we saw that a lot in Washington too, where there were some holes on defense, a lot of high danger scoring opportunities against Kuemper. Whereas we saw Lindgren flourish in those positions and maybe give up a few more goals on the perimeter. Kuemper wasn't really able to handle those high danger situations as well as Lindgren, thus losing the starting job. This is kind of the new way of defending in the NHL, is putting a lot more pressure on the goaltender than in years past. Thus is one of many factors why we've seen average save percentages league-wide dip a bit. But I do like Kuemper. I'm not entirely sure how the Kings are going to defend in front of him. They tend to want to push the puck up the zone, but are also not bad in their own zone, can play that kind of tight defensive style in front of their goaltender. So we'll see. I'd expect that Kuemper to have a decent season. I'm thinking this is just, I don't know, based on stats and style of play and kind of just guessing because you never really know. I'd expect him to be around a 908, 909 save percentage this season, playing maybe 45 games barring injury. So we'll see what happens. I like Kuemper. I think this is a good move for the Kings. The biggest win for the Kings, though, not only do you have to not pay for a goaltender, but you get rid of the Dubois contract. Dubois has hit 60 points. It was like 61, 62, 63 points I think he hit 3 times in his career. What's he, 25? He's 25 right now. So, like, that might be his ceiling. There's probably a little more scoring talent in there. But will that ever come to fruition at the NHL level? I don't know. He's bounced around teams. He's had issues with coaches in the past. One being Tortorella, which some players do. But if you work hard and you have a good work ethic, usually you don't have an issue with a coach like Tortorella. So there are questions with Dubois. He he can play defense very well. He just kind of chooses not to and focus on the offensive side of the puck, which is fair because that's also what gets you paid. But you want to see more of a complete game from Dubois, and you want him to you want him to have a full effort every time he steps on the ice. And throughout his entire career, you just haven't seen that in Dubois in his game. So there are questions there. There are questions about how it'll affect their locker room. It's kind of a young locker room. You have a veteran like Ovechkin. You have some veterans like Tom Wilskin. You got TJ Oshie in there, John Carlson. But at the same time, a riff from kind of a more veteran player. He'll be your second highest paid player on the team. That can cause some issues, right? That's kind of why we saw the Parise Suter buyouts in Minnesota. You had two top players who kind of didn't help the locker room scenario in Minnesota. One more so than the other, but at the same time, there were still issues between those two. Nonetheless, so this is a risky move, but at the same time, this still addresses a need for the Washington Capitals. They needed a top six centerman, right? You got Dylan Strome, who played well next to Ovechkin last year. I would assume that's going in. Though that's your top pairing center and wing. Tom Wilson, bit of a down year. Also, didn't really have many highly skilled forwards to play with on his line, so that can contribute to his lack of offensive numbers this past season. And ideally, Dubois having a down year, both Wilson and Dubois should have something to prove. They should both bounce back a bit. I don't think we're talking about point per game years from either of these guys. But at the same time, given the physicality, given the defense of ability of Tom Wilson, given, again, both of these guys are physical, given the offensive talent of Dubois, it could be a very good second line pairing should both players play up to their potential. So we'll see with that. I understand the move, but for me, the Capitals kind of taking a big gamble on this, and I get it. You don't want to go out and spend the money. You don't want to spend the money to get a second line center in unrestricted free agency and have a bidding war and kind of sell to a player why you're sticking with Ovechkin and Wilson and some of these older players, and trying to make a push for the Stanley Cup, but really falling pretty far short. Right? You also don't have to pay to dump off Darcy Kuemper's contract, which is kind of a win. So I don't know. Personally, on the surface, I think the Kings get the much better end of this deal. You dump off Dubois seven by $8.5 million contract. You get a starting caliber goaltender. Still has something to prove. Should ideally bounce back a bit at a lower cap hit, at a lower term. So at least if this doesn't work out, 3 years, you're done with the contract. You don't have to worry about it. There's trade options here. Whereas Dubois, you have 7 more years at a higher cap hit with a full no movement clause and then a modified no trade clause for the final 3 years, which can make it a little hairy, right? Especially if Dubois doesn't perform well the next 4 years, and then you're going to have to retain salary on a team he's willing to be moved to, and you're likely going to have to somewhat pay to get out of that contract. So I think if the Kings were going to get out of the Dubois contract, now is the time, and they did it. So I think that's a smart move. I still don't understand why they acquired him when they did, and the pieces they gave up for him originally to the Jets. Still a head scratcher, but at least we don't see this too often around the league. At least the existing general manager, recognized that this was a recent mistake and it needs to be corrected before it gets worse. So I do have to, a lot of general managers around the league refuse to admit they've made mistakes or have been wrong, especially in the recent past. And I got to give him credit. This is what you want to do when you want to do it, and I think he did it well. So I think this fills needs for both teams. To what extent those needs are filled will depend on how much each player bounces back from this past season. But yeah, that's kind of to sum it up. The Kings, a little more cap space, can get a little creative in the offseason, maybe help out their defense, their blue line a bit. I don't know. But at least the Kings have flexibility. Capitals will have flexibility next offseason. So yeah, that's it. Let me know what you think. If you have a winner or a loser, personally, if I were to pick, I think the Kings would be my winner, purely because you're dumping off this contract and you're still filling a need without really paying for it. Kings likely would have to pay a team to take Dubois off their hands, right? And still have to sign a starting caliber goaltender. So then you're losing potentially draft picks and you're still paying extra salary, which can get hairy. But at the same time, I get the deal for the Capitals. I just think it's a big gamble. If it pays off, this is going to be a great deal for the Capitals. The odds of it paying off aren't super high. Therefore, the odds of it paying off for the Capitals in terms of this trade, I don't know. I don't know how well this is going to work out for Washington. There are questions. I don't want to speak for teams, general managers, or players. Just speculation. But yeah, let me know what you think. I don't know, man. It's like the Stanley Cup Finals aren't done yet. So all this news yesterday, kind of a bit of a surprise, and it's fun. So that's all I got. I appreciate you. Take care, all right?